Hello, and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. In this video, I am going to show you how to make this wall shelf for only 12 bucks. So let me get started with telling you a little bit about the materials I will be using to make this shelf. Now, for the outer frame and this middle shelf part, I used 2 pieces of furring strip. This is what furring strips look like raw. It is a 1x3 furring strip. And furring strips are really cheap. They're not that great of grade of lumber. However, if you take some time to pick through the furring strip stack, you can find some pretty decent pieces to work with. And at about $1.60 a piece, they are like the perfect thing if you are trying to make something on a budget. I then also went and purchased a 2-foot by 4-foot piece of hardboard for the back of this piece. And hardboard is basically just a compressed type of cardboard, probably around about a 380 something. And then these lovely little tiles are actually samples. So I just went and grabbed in the flooring department over by the large rolls of carpet. They have these samples that are actually sheet vinyl. They're foam back and you can just walk away with whatever you'd like. And these are cut at 9 inches by 6 inches. And so I used 16 of these sample tiles, and you can arrange them any way you want to. So that was a free material, but I did need to add some glue. I used this liquid nails, which ran me somewhere around $2 and change. So I used a couple screws, which were very minimal in price, so I don't really count those. You can pick up screws at some hardware stores at really for pennies per screw. So on the back of this guy, I have a piece of wire running so that you can use it as a hanger. Mirror wire, which was about another $2. You could forego that part of it and actually just screw this directly to the wall. The other thing I did use, which is also optional, is your paint and patch. This is what I use to fill my screw holes after I put it together. This runs about $5. You might have this laying around your house so you can save yourself that expense. If you want that whole rustic thing and you're okay with the rustic look, you don't necessarily have to fill in the screw holes. And then lastly, I did use a stain for the finish, but you could get away with using a watered down acrylic, and that could cost you $1 from the craft store or even the 99-cent store. When everything is said and done and I do my totals, it's somewhere around $12 to $13 for this guy. So let's go ahead and get into how to make this thing. So first thing I'm going to do is lay out my tiles and figure out a pattern so that I can take some measurements off of them so I know what I'm cutting as far as my backer board goes. And then from that backer board, I'm going to be taking all of the measurements for the frames and so on. There we go, I'm just going to play around with some patterns. Okay, once you've sorted out a pattern that you think you are happy with, you need to take a picture of that. So go ahead and, grab your phone, take a snapshot. Now that I have the pattern layout, I'm gonna go ahead and take those measurements. Because I purchased the handy panel hardboard, which was already 24 inches by 48 inches, and therefore I'm only making 1 cut. If you do not have a table saw, do not want to make that cut yourself, you could have your Home Depot do that cut for you. But here in California, or at least in my area anyway, my Home Depot no longer cuts things like chipboard, hardboard, melamine, that kind of thing. I went with the hardboard because I know I can cut it here in my shop, and it was only $3.62. You can get 1/4 inch plywood or even 1/8 inch thick luan. The plywood and the luan, they will cut for you at Home Depot. Those will run you a little bit more. If you don't have a table saw, you could use a circular saw also. The whole goal here for me is to try and do this the cheapest way possible. So again, that's why I went with the hardboard. I have no idea whether or not Lowe's will actually do the cutting for you. I just have a Home Depot close by to me. I've worked at 5 different Home Depots in 3 different states, so there's some kind of special place with Home Depot where it's this familiarity thing that I always gotta lean towards going there. I am not working with Home Depot, let me just state that. I have no endorsements by them. It's just, I know the store so well because I have previously worked there many, many years ago when I was younger. Alright, I am about to create one of the largest woodworking sins possible. You are never supposed to actually cut the piece that you are trying to save on the opposite free side of the table saw. You always usually want to keep the piece that you need to cut for your perfect measurements up against the fence. But because my out-feet table only goes to about 30 inches and I actually need 36, unfortunately it's going to be a lot easier for me to do it where I'm actually cutting the excess piece off that is going to be butted up against the fence. I'm going to be extra careful to make sure that I'm handling my excess piece properly, because if at any point it wavers and tips up against the edge of this blade, I can end up messing up my square. I'll end up having, a jacked up corner. If and when I can, I always like to make the majority of my measurements with a folding rule. Now that I have cut that piece of hardboard, it is what it is. Make sure that I didn't overstep that cut and that it is in fact 36 by 24. And if it is not, and I'm off by 1/8 of an inch here and there, I'm going to just make that adjustment on my piece of furring strips before I make those cuts. So I've set these up here on my board, and as I've laid them out on my board to get an idea of my measurement, I realized that I don't actually want to put this on the outside. I want to put it directly on top so that it gives me somewhere to staple this backer board to. So I'm going to need 2 pieces that are going to be sitting just slightly on the inside of those boards. And now that I have this up against there, I can measure. And this is where the folding rule really comes in handy, because you can really get your accurate measurements by getting this in here. And when I took this measurement, I'm looking at 22 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those pieces. Okay, I can just come and measure my width between the two, and then that should give me what I need that third piece measurement to be, that it's going to be the inside insert of the shelf. I think these are 3/8 of an inch thick, but you can never be too sure, especially with the furring strips. They're rounded over on the edges, so trying to get an accurate measurement on a rounded edge is not always the easiest thing. I suppose what I could do is come in and line this up, put a pencil mark, and then I can just measure from pencil mark to pencil mark. And I am looking at 34 3/4. Okay, I've gone ahead and set this up just to double check and make sure that everything looks okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I have these right angle little clamps that kind of help be a second pair of hands for me. You do not need to use these, but I have them, so I might as well just throw them on. It just makes it a little bit easier for me, especially when I'm doing things like this that are like frames. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these on, and basically what they are, it's a 90-degree corner with little wheelie clamps on each side. They look very much like a C-clamp, and then you can loosen and tighten them, and this little bit of the clamp will grab the wood and hold it in place, and it'll ensure that it is a 90-degree angle. For me, the reason why I use it is just because if I'm here working alone in the shop, it just provides me an extra pair of hands. I don't have to be sitting here holding a corner while I'm also trying to manage the drill. Alright, I am using my favorite brand of countersink bits. Let me take that little piece out, that's actually not necessary. This is Wolfcraft. I get these from online. I used to be able to get them at Home Depot. They don't have them there anymore. The reason why I love these is all the brands I've used, and I've gone from the really expensive ones to the really cheap ones. As far as longevity goes, they don't break as easily. They are a little bit more on the expensive side. They're about $25 for a set of 4. The most common size I usually use is an 8, so you could just order just one, and I think it's somewhere around like $8 or $9. But the reason why I love this particular brand is that their drill bits are tapered bits, and so the whole purpose is that this tapered part will pilot your hole, and then the top part has another cutter head that does your boring for you. So what that will do is it'll bore just below the surface of where the screw head's gonna go, so you can go ahead and fill that in with some filler, and it will hide the screw for you. I personally prefer using screws. I feel like that having the teeth on the screw just is a stronger connection. To start out doing a lot of upcycling, and things that are nailed together just are very easy to yank apart, which was great for me when I was upcycling wood. wood, but it also had lent a lot of insight into the way things are made. And though nails were, useful for its time, they're actually not nearly as strong as using, I find anyway, as using screws. So I'm gonna be setting my tapered bit here. I always set it just a bit shorter than where I actually need it to go, so I have that little bit of extra length to do my grabbing. I am using 1¼ drywall screws just because it's what I have. So I am gonna just be piloting 2 holes in each end of this frame and then putting in 2 drywall screws. I am not going to glue these ends of the frame coming together because basically I would be putting glue on end grain, and you do not ever want to just put glue on end grain because it doesn't actually do anything. The end grain, which is this where the short end of the grain runs, this would be your base grain or side grain depending on where it was cut on the tree. Same goes for this. And then this where it is the fibrous stuff that is like the roughest part, that is end grain. And end grain is basically a bunch of little tiny open fibers. Just think of a giant chunk of straws, and if you were looking down the hole, imagine trying to put a bunch of glue on that and try and getting it to stick to something. The only thing that would happen is all the glue would run down the holes, and that's basically what happens with end grain. Putting glue here would be completely pointless. That's why I really want to make sure I'm using those screws, because the screws are going to be doing the holding for me. And then I will be applying glue to the backer part of this, and between having the corners of the frames screwed and the glue that's going to be holding the backboard to the frame, we should be good to go. And now remove these pieces, I don't need them. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is to measure for this middle bar that's going to be put in as my shelf. Now, whenever you mount a picture in a frame, you're supposed to mount the picture just slightly higher. If you try and go for directly center, it's going to look like it's actually falling down. Let's say that here's my frame and I mount this here dead center. When you look at this mounted in the frame, it looks like it's actually falling down. So what you want to do is you want to mount it just slightly higher so that when you do look at it, it doesn't look like it's off, because, and this has to do with the way we see things eye level. Because this is meant to be a wall piece that's going to be hanging behind a couch, you're still probably going to be looking at it at that kind of level. That being said, I want to make sure that when I put in this board to mount it, that I am going to mount it just slightly higher by 1 inch so that my top shelf will be a little bit larger than the bottom. I'm going to mount at 10 5/8. So I'm going to put a marker at 10 5/8, and that's going to be the top of my board. I'm going to do that on both sides so I can make sure it's centered. Alright, I have loaded up my brad nailer, which is actually a staple combo nailer. If you don't have one of these, you could just use some regular tacking nails. I have it loaded up with the largest available brads for this particular nailer, which whenever you are using a brad nailer or stapler, you want to be wearing a set of safety glasses just in case one of those pop off and spring at you. You don't want pieces of metal to come flying at you. So I have a pair of those on, and then I also have a damp rag because, as I said earlier, I will be gluing the back of this. So I'm just using my Titebond 2. If I was gluing up 2 pieces of solid wood, I probably would make sure I really blend this well, but I think once I put the pressure of this down, it should do it for me as I hammer down. I'm gonna put the shiny side up because if I leave the rough side down, I think I'll have a better adhesion when I'm gluing those tiles down. I'm gonna sink a nail on opposite sides just to hold it in place before I go to town nailing up the whole thing. The next thing I'm going to do is to put a line where I screwed that center beam. See how bad the damage is. And I completely missed that line. Righty? Thankfully I'm gluing that stuff to here, so it's not going to see these, but I do have to dig them on out. I'm just hammering them back through, and then I'm going to make sure when I flip this over that I nail before it. Alright, the next step is to fill my holes. I am going to be putting a stain on this wood, but the stain is going to be a wash, so I don't care if there's a little bit of those screw holes. So I was not going to sink these holes, but when I flipped this over, I realized it started scratching my surface. So I am going to go ahead and sink the brad nails. Somewhere in this mess, I have nail sets, but I have no idea where they are. Maybe someday I will clean and find them, but if you do not have nail sets, I am just using this screw. I am placing the tip of the screw on top of the nail head and then hammering down, and it sets the nail head in a little bit. I have to be careful because this is only an 1/8 inch thick. You don't want to go sinking it too far below the surface because then it won't actually do its job, which is to hold it onto the back of this frame. Alright, that should do me, and now I'll go get that spackle. I just got done sanding up the spackle, and now I'm getting ready to apply my stain. Okay, I'm gonna let this dry, but this is only a colored stain. I will still need to go on and put a top coat in order to protect it. While I was at Home Depot, I did find those little color samples that you can purchase. You can normally sell for about $3.50. However, over in the mixed wrong color section, I found a bunch of them that were kind of on the neutral spectrum, and they were only 50 cents. You could water this down because it is a latex based paint and apply it as a wash onto the piece, and then you would not need to put on the top coat. You could also use an acrylic paint. The acrylic paints can be found at a craft store, usually under $1. Sometimes I've even seen them at the 99-cent store. I'm gonna wait an hour and then I will come back and deal with adding that layer of protective sealant. Alright, I'm now looking at my original image so I can figure out how these are going to line up. Looks like I had this. I know I'm going to have to be doing some trimming. So after I went in and put on the stain and I let it completely dry, I decided to use lacquer as my top coat. And this is just a basic spray lacquer. This one's made by Rust-Oleum. I went in and I laid out my tiles again. I am going to have to go in and trim these tiles. To do that, I am going to just measure the height of all of my spaces, divide by the number of tiles I have across and the number of tiles I have up and down, and then I can get an idea of what I need each tile to be. This is not very helpful. You. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and use this liquid nails to glue down these tiles. This one little tube, which was somewhere around $3.60 something cents. It should basically take care of all of these tiles on this entire piece. So I set it down, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a wiggle. Make sure I get that glue nice and squished. Alright, the very last thing I need to do is to install a way to hang this thing. The simplest way will be just to take 2 small 1-inch screws and some picture wire, and I'm just going to lodge a screw on each side and wind some of that wire around. I'm going to come down 6 inches, that way when the wire gets taut, I don't want to see exposed wire up at the top. Now there's a certain way of tying this. You're supposed to loop it around. Alrighty, so this is pretty much ready for hanging. All you have to do is put 2 screws in the wall. The screws will hook onto this wire and then it's good to go. I'm gonna go ahead and hang this and take some shots. That's basically it for today, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Now I've just got it all tangled up. What the heck? Come on. Nope, she's gonna think it's a toy. Oh, Mama, that is not for you to play with. What do you guys think? Does it look even? Anybody? Anybody? Yes? No? Is it even?